Okay, now it's time to take a look at adding SignalR into our application. So I'm just going to clean up the stuff we've got going on at the top. And SignalR is going to be part of our API project. Instead of using API controllers though, we're going to use SignalR hubs as the endpoints that the clients connect to. So what we'll do is we'll create a new folder inside the API and we'll just call it SignalR. And what we'll do is we'll add a new C# class inside here and we'll just call it Chat Hub. And inside here, what we're going to do is derive from the hub. And we'll get this from using Microsoft ASP.NET Core SignalR. We don't need to install an additional package to use SignalR. It comes with the .NET runtime that we're using, in this case .NET 5. And similar to API controllers where we derive from a controller base, in this case, because it's SignalR, we're going to derive from a SignalR hub. And what we'll do is we'll add a constructor, and what we're going to do is use mediator inside here, just like we do in our API controllers. So what we'll do is we'll say add mediator, and we'll call it mediator, and then we'll say using mediator, and we'll of course just initialize this field from parameter. And we need two methods in here. The first one is to send a comment. And what we can do is say public async task, and we'll call it send comment. And what we'll do is we'll bring in our create.command that we created for our comments, and we'll bring in application comments for this. Be careful because we've used create in two different places. We want application comments for our namespace. So do make sure you bring this one in, and then we'll specify command. Just like we do in API controllers really. But the difference with this is that, and let's also bring in system threading tasks, but the difference from an API controller is what we call a method is all important. Because from the client side, they'll be able to invoke methods inside a SignalR hub. Our client will make a connection to this hub, and then it will be able to invoke methods that we create inside this hub. So what we're going to do for the send comment is we're going to say var comment equals await, and then we're going to say mediator.send, and we're going to pass in the command. So what we're going to send up from the client is the properties that are contained inside the create. So that will be the activity ID and the body of the comment as well. Everything else we can get from our logic in our application layer. And what we want to do is after this comment has been saved into our database, then it's going to have the comment ID and it's going to be shaped via AutoMapper into a comment DTO. And we want to send that to anybody who is connected to the hub, including the person that's made the comment in the first place. We're going to return that comment to themselves so that that can be displayed in the user interface. And the way that we do that is we've got access to the connected clients inside this client's object. And then we can specify who inside the clients we want to send this to. We've got an option to send it to all connected clients, and that would include anybody connected to this hub, whether they're connected to one activity or another. We have the option to send it to the caller alone, just the person who's invoking this send command method, or we can send it to the group. And the group will create very shortly, but our group in this case is just going to be what matches the activity ID. So each activity is going to have its own group. And we'll specify command activity ID, but because the activity ID is a GUID, we need to make this to a string because our group names are effectively strings. And then what we can do is use the send async method, and then we give our method a name of what we want to use to receive what we're sending here. So I'm going to call this method receive comment. And we need to use the name of this method on the client side, and then we can pass it what we want to send back. So we're going to send back the comment.value because the comment is a result object that contains our comment DTO. So we need to get the value of that. What we also want to do is when a client connects to our hub, we want them to join a group. And what we can do for that is we can use the onConnected method inside our hub. So we can do something when a client connects. And what we'll do is we'll say public override async task, as we're going to override one of the methods inside the hub, and the one that we want to override is called onConnected async. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the activity ID from the query string in this case. We don't have root parameters when we go to a SignalR hub, but we can use query string parameters to send up additional information. And what we can do, we can get that from the HTTP context. So we'll say var HTTP context equals context, and we can say get HTTP context. And then we can say var activity ID equals HTTP context dot request dot query, and then we can use square brackets to get the key of the activity ID. And we just need to make sure that we send up a query string from the client that contains the activity ID using this as the key. Spelling and case sensitivity is important here. If you've called your activity ID query string parameter as list, then this is how you need to specify it in the client exactly. And then we can say await groups, another object that we get inside a hub, and this has a method to add a connected client to a group. And we pass in the context and the connection ID, and then we give the group a name, or which group do we want to add this to, and we're going to say the group activity ID. Now, we don't need to do anything when we disconnect, because SignalR is going to remove any connection IDs from any groups that connection ID belongs to. So we only need to do this when we connect, and it's automatically going to remove this client or this connection ID from any groups when a client disconnects from SignalR. And then what we can do is say var result equals, and we'll say await and mediator and send. And what we want to do is effectively send down the list of comments to the client. And we have a handler to do this, so we'll say new list.query, and then we can initialize the activity ID that's equal to, and because our list query is expecting the activity ID as a GUID, we'll need to pass that into a GUID. So we can use GUID and bring in using system and say GUID.pass, and then we can pass in the activity ID. And then all we need to do is say await, and then we can say clients. And who do we want to send this list of comments to? Well, the only user we need to send this to is the caller, the person making this request to connect to our SignalR hub. So we can just use the caller in this case. And then we can say send async, and what we'll do is we'll give this a name of load comments, and then we can pass in the results.value. So whenever a client connects, we're going to join them to a group with the name of the activity ID, and we're going to send them a list of comments that we get from our database. Anytime that a comment is sent to that group, then they're going to receive that new comment based on this method here. So a fairly simple implementation of SignalR here. So what we're going to do then is we need to add this to as a service. We need to add SignalR as a service. So we'll go to our application service extensions, and then what we can do is say services and add SignalR. And then we can go to our startup class because we need to add an endpoint for this. So we'll open up our startup class. And if we scroll down to where our endpoints are, then we need to say endpoints. And then we can say map hub. And then we can specify the name of our hub, which is chat hub. And we can give it a root, and we're just going to say /chat as the name of our endpoint, and then we just need to bring in using API SignalR. And we're almost done with our configuration. We just need to take a look at authentication next for SignalR.